welcome to part two. I hope you like part one. Forgot to say we were coming to the end of it there. Just wait for Julian to log on. I'm just going through my top 10 there. He's on. Here we go. Yeah, you were saying there, Julian.
Yeah, I was just saying about the Australian about Joe Pataya. Again, forgive me if the pronunciation's right. When you can just wipe out not brilliant elite world champions, but decent fighters like Ellis Zorro. Yeah, they were largely unproven, and Jordan Thompson, just to blitz them, that's when you know someone's elite, because other world champions might have struggled a little bit or taken a little bit longer, but he looks the thing about him is he looks so focused. You know, when fighters have that game face and you just know I mean, we know he had a bit of pedigree from a long time ago, but you know, with Opataya, he's got that toughness about him. You know, he's not going to be a fighter who, when he gets it put on him and he has a tough night, who's going to fold. Some fighters just have a bit of toughness about them and a bit of spite. And I've always loved boxers with spite, you know, a real spite when they're in the ring. As soon as the fight's over, it's over. But I like fighters to close the show. It's something what I've always loved from the fighters who I have always, you know, admired the Fab Four. You never got the Fab Four coasting, did you? When they could close the show. It just didn't happen. And I think that's something special in fighters. And he has that. And I love Canelo Alvarez's style. I don't love his background in terms of the drugs thing, but I think, you know, I give him credit for how he provided the hair follicle and stuff. But Canelo sometimes always gives the impression to me as somebody who could sometimes close the show but didn't. And I just like to see fighters with spite who will just close the show. And some of the fighters that you've listed on there, like Inoue as well, and just Beterbiev, is that they don't seem comfortable, do they, with a 12-round points win over somebody that they can dominate. They just beat them down. I love boxing, I love skill, but I like spite and I like finishers.
Well, all them 10 there, that's my 10 at the moment.
I mean, we talk about boxing not being what it was. I talk about boxing potentially, it'll never die, but being a fading sport, it's become more of a pastime as opposed to a mainstream sport. But it's still healthy if you look at the fighters that you've just listed.
Yeah.
The good fighters, aren't they? I'm not saying they're the greatest of all time, but at least 6 or 7 of those fighters that you've listed there, I think could have handled themselves in some of the great eras.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting they would have been world champions or the number one, but they could have competed and performed with some really great champions of the past. There's some good names in there. So boxing's a lot healthier when you look at it like that from a positive point of view than when we just see these big shows with just the showmen on there who rarely deliver.
Yeah, what do you think about the comparisons to Mayweather? Because looking at the starts, Mayweather to Haney, is Eddie getting above himself here? Because Haney's going to need to win in 3 more weight divisions and win 19 fights, and 14 of them are going to have to be world champions. That's just to equal Mayweather. So he's got he's got a long way to go yet, hasn't he?
I guess it's the job of a promoter, but I think the job of a promoter is to promote the fighter and to build him up to be a star. And then the fighter's performances have to act. He has to shine like a star. But I also think what promoters shouldn't do is wax lyrical too much and insult our intelligence, because there's a hell of a long way to go before you're a world champion for 20 years, like Floyd Mayweather was. And I'm not suggesting he has to remain undefeated, by the way, as well. But you know, I don't obsess in that like some people do. But he's not Floyd yet. Haney's a hell of a fighter, but I think he's got 2 or 3 big names to have on his resume before we can even think about. And what we also know, Russell, is that you know I was never a big fan of Floyd when he was fighting. I always admired his skill set, and technically he's as good a fighter as I've ever seen in my life. But I wasn't a huge fan. But you can't deny his greatness, even though often he selected certain fighters at the right time. That just makes him smart, doesn't it? But when he had to bite down, Floyd could bite down. I remember them Medana fights and Medana just so physical and really putting it on him and clubbing him at the back of the head. And he could take it. He was tough. Floyd wasn't just, it was Michigan tough, wasn't it? It wasn't just a fancy Dan. And the early version of Floyd as well, he was spiteful, wasn't he? When he let his hands go on, Manfredo, and he let his hands go on Gatti. Floyd could be spiteful as well. He was a special talent. And what we do know is that fighters like Floyd generally only come once every 20, 30 years. So is that Devin Haney? Instinctively, I'll say it's not, no.
That's what I'd say.
Yeah.
Who's to blame for Joshua Wilder being down the pan now? Is it greed? Is it
Do you know
promote?
what? You've got to say both of them and the promoters, because if two fighters want something to happen and two promoters want something to happen, they make it happen. Okay, we've made bigger fights in boxing than Joshua and Wilder. We really have. And you can say he got offered 50 million, he did this, they flew Wilder over, they were supposed to do this, they signed last week, and now it's been thrown into doubt and everything else. You can say it as much as you want, but it didn't happen because Wilder was happy to have his thin WBC title reign until Fury snatched it off him. Joshua was fine to be picking up Tyson Fury's old belts, beating some decent but not great opposition. They were both happy to make millions and make a lot of noise around fighting each other. And it never happened 6, 7 years ago. And it could have happened last week, couldn't it? They could have done that fight last week. They chose not to. And as always, great fights generally don't happen when you leave it too late. You make the best fights, you make the big fights when fighters are at the best or near the best or in the prime, because you get a better fight. Because what happens is you either don't get the fight, it never happens, or you get fights like Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, 5 years too late. Whatever you think about that fight, it was a dud. It wasn't great. Or you get fights like Kell Brook and Amir Khan when they've got losses on the record, they're shot to bits. And even though it's an exciting fight, it's really two past the best fighters who's like kind of beating each other up. And it's not a healthy spectacle to watch. So when you get the best against the best at their best, when you get Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, and when you get Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, you get great fights, mate. You get competitive, thrilling, great fights. Now, they could still make Wilder and Joshua, but 20 million has just fallen off the value of that fight already, hasn't it?
Oh, and Joshua would be picking at his bones if he fought Wilder now, wouldn't he?
Oh, Joshua would be a big favourite. We've spoke about this a couple of times, and I remember saying to you, I had Joshua a slight favourite about 18 months ago. Thought Joshua would maybe just a little bit more skill than Wilder, and I think he might be smart enough to keep away most of the time. And then more recently, I've thought, you know what, Joshua's weak mindset. I think there's a danger that Wilder might iron him out. But I've never really broke it down too much, but it's as you said, who would really care about that fight now? I'm sure some people wouldn't because of the big names, but who really cares about that fight? And what we have got now is we've got Joshua doesn't need that fight.
Well, he doesn't, does he? But who's he going to be his dance partner?
Well, this is the problem. I think they'll pick off a couple more fighters, and because I think it's Fury and Usyk. Is that a 2-fight deal?
Yeah.
So that fight might, they'll fight in February or whenever the fight. February, it might get pushed back, but the noises are they're going to fight February the 3rd, I think it is. So that might happen in February. It might not, but I bet the rematch isn't a quick thing, The rematch will be another 6. So I guess what I'm saying is Joshua's probably out of the title picture for 12 months, unless the belts just split up and then he picks up a belt against a Hrgovic or a whoever.
We did say that he'd go for Hrgovic and not Wilder next, but they're now saying the gutted Wilder lost and it's cost them millions. But I got the impression they were going to go for Hrgovic all along.
Well, they've cost themselves millions, haven't they? Because they've procrastinated and they're waiting until it's the absolute right time. And the right time was when they were both undefeated world champions, wasn't it? It was like it would have been electric. It would have been like a wild fight.
Disputers.
Yeah, and now you got them now. You've got AJ, 3 losses on the record. Wilder's what was he had? One winning his last 4 or something. Um, in the last 3 years. It's pretty poor form, isn't it? Now, if you look at Wilder's form, that's pretty poor form. Joshua's been busy, but not spectacular up until the weekend when he boxed well. I think there's not a massive public appeal for that fight, and not a lot of love now. I think people will, you're only as good as your last performance. So Wilder right now stinks. AJ is good again. Whether he's the best he's ever been is a different matter. You remember my prediction again. I said he will stop Wallin. I thought Wallin was made to order for him. Absolutely made to order, and so it proved. But I think it's going to be all eyes on Fury and Usyk now, isn't it? That's going to be the one we want to watch, and that's the one we're interested in. I would think there'll be a big undercard on that show, but I don't know what that undercard would be.
What did you think to Lyndon Arthur's performance against Bivol?
Again, did the breakdown. I thought it would be well beat, but Lyndon Arthur he would never beat Bivol in a month of Sundays. But if you're Lyndon Arthur, he's had a couple of niggles, a couple of injuries. You're Lyndon Arthur and Pat Barrett, you're professionals. You don't know when your next opportunity is going to come. You get offered a lot of money to be on a big show. You take it. You take it. And I think Lyndon Arthur did as much as he could have done. People might have said he'd never really let his hands go. But when you're outgunned, you're against an elite, absolute elite fighter like Bivol, and you haven't quite had the notice, and you haven't quite had great preparation with, like I said, he's had some shoulder issues and various things. You're never going to beat him, but it is prize fighting, Russell. And I hope he got well paid. And I certainly don't think he disgraced himself. And there was something, Pat Barrett might never say this. I respect Pat Barrett a lot. But there was something about his performance which was it was more about containment as opposed to really going for it. Because I think he didn't have the stamina in the camp and the fitness levels that he would have wanted had he really, really pressed that fight and gone for it. You have to be at your best to be able to do that. So there was an element of containment. And what I mean by containment in his approach was, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get through the 12 rounds. And if an really good opportunity comes, I'll take it. But I'm not going to search for that opportunity. So I thought it performed all right. He'll go back. He'll have a nice bit of bank money. Hopefully, he'll buy a little bit of property with that. He'll invest it wisely. And Lyndon Arthur will come again because you know what? The Bivols, and no matter what we want to say, no matter how we build up the Yards and the Callum Smiths and everybody else, right? The Beta Beards and the Bivols are like 3 levels above our light heavyweights. We haven't got a light heavyweight who can touch those two. Not one. So if you get a chance against those guys, you take your shot, don't you? Tony Simpson took his shot against Marvin Hagler, didn't he? He wasn't going to beat Marvin Hagler in a million years, but he took his shot. And that's all you can do. So credit to him. We can't criticize fighters, can we, for not taking opportunities and then criticize fighters for taking those opportunities. So 10 out of 10 to Lyndon Arthur and Pat Barrett.
What do you think to Caballero?
I think it was very good. I didn't really study the form on that fight, if I'm being completely honest. They were both unbeaten. What was it called? Magdameth? Another one I've not pronounced too well, but it was just a big, scary monster who didn't have a lot of experience under his belt. He didn't have a lot of stamina. And he was certainly looked a lot more frightening than he was. And I thought Caballero, again, there was something about him. I don't know if I said it to you or to Max or to one of my kids. There was something about his healthy glow. I keep talking about this, but I remember fighters I've worked with when they've had a really healthy glow, and Chris Aston would say, "Look at his skin. He's looking healthy. Tony's looking great. Josh is looking great. Sykes is looking great. He's got a real healthy glow. And there are times when they don't have that healthy glow about them. They start to sweat really nicely. Not too dry early on. And Cabell had a really nice healthy glow about him. And just like Joseph Parker, and I thought, you know what, he fancies this, but I don't know enough about either of them to make a confident pick. That was the only one on the whole card. I was like, I haven't studied it. I just haven't. But good for him. Spectacular knockout. Looked He looked all right. He looked all right. Is he a future world champion? Doubt it. But so what? Not everybody can be future world champions, but he looks decent, Russell. And I think 2, 3 more fights, we might see him in at least the mix. He's useful. He's got a good skill set, and he showed a lot of bravery against a guy that physically strong with that much power. Yeah, it was good. It was certainly better than Sanchez's opponent. And who was the other one? We had remind me. Who did Frank Sanchez beat?
Far.
Yeah, Junior Farr. That wasn't great. But I thought, was it Mark Demore who was that was the worst fight on that card, wasn't it?
Oh, against Sergovic.
Oh, I mean, just this small, stocky man who was like 42 years old, who was never ever good at any point in his life to challenge a world champion or a world-class fighter. And then that was dreadful matchmaking, was that? It was absolutely dreadful.
What I want to know is how Demore got to that record.
I mean, that is staggering, isn't it? I mean, he kept turning round, didn't he? Every time he got hit at the side of the head, he kept turning away. It was a bizarre, almost surrender type. Yeah, and he had a healthy record, a massively winning record, loads of knockouts.
1-2.
I mean, you can't get your head around it, can you? You just, where'd you start? Where'd you start?
41-3-2 now he is.
But that proves the point, doesn't it? What we've said. You can really build anybody up by beating tomato cans and some of these small shows, fighting people in your own backyard. You can really do that. We've seen fighters coming, haven't we, against UK opposition. And you just look at these guys and you're like, how has he got an unbeaten record? And I'll tell you what we're going to see. We're going to see one of those fighters very, very soon against Conor Benn, where you see the statistics and you're like, he's 16-0, he's unbeaten. But when you actually watch them fight on YouTube, you're like, wow. And look, how many fighters are unbeaten in the UK right now? There are tons of them out there.
Speaking of Ben, he's fighting a 17-0 guy, Peter Dobson.
So Peter Dobson, right? Let's talk about my favorite. Let's talk about Conor Benn, right? It's clever what they're doing, by the way. You and I had a bit of
16-0.
So Peter Dobson. So if you think about Conor Benn, yep, we've had this caged animal who's been ready to do his words. I can't see anybody going 2 rounds with me, the mood I'm in. So you got Conor Benn, you got people questioning now, real people. What will Conor Benn perform like without his special protein shakes? How is he going to perform? And then he comes back and he fights. Before anybody says his opponent had a good record, we've just been talking about Mark Demore's record, haven't we? So stop thinking about unbeaten records, everybody, and thinking Conor Benn's last opponent was pretty poor. He was pretty poor, and he gave Conor a hard fight, took all his shots. So the guy who was going to knock out everybody in 2 rounds couldn't even put a dint in this guy, albeit it was a tough kid. So Conor Benn needs a highlight reel KO. The marketing team need a highlight reel KO. Now, if you remember, slightly different because Conor Benn's unbeaten. Nigel Benn got tanked by Watson. So he got exposed early on by Michael Watson. So they shipped him across to America, just like they did Conor Benn, albeit for different reasons, for legal reasons, licensing reasons. Nigel Benn went over, didn't he? And he had a 10 rounder. His first fight in the US was a 10 rounder, and he struggled. He struggled. And what do you need when you've got someone coming off a loss or for whatever reason, he's not the puncher that you think he is. And then he goes to the States and he has a tough 10 rounder. So father and son, history repeats itself. You know, I always believe everything goes full circle. So Nigel Benn needed a highlight reel KO. He'd struggled with a guy who had a losing record. I forget his name, was it Poffo? I don't know. I forget his name. And he struggled with a guy who had a losing record, did Nigel. And they brought someone in. Was it Jose Quinones?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he fought that Sanderline Williams as well, didn't he?
After, yeah, Quinones was sandwiched in between the two. So he had an unimpressive fight against an unimpressive opponent. And they needed a highlight reel KO for Nigel Benn for the Dark Destroyer to be back. And they brought over Jorge Amparo, and Nigel banged him out in one round. And suddenly Ben was reborn. What Conor Benn needs right now in the eyes of the public, he doesn't need Boots Ennis and to get ironed out. He doesn't need a 154-pound fight with Virgil Ortiz, who's now obviously moved up. He's never going to get a fight with, you know, the big guns of Spencer or Crawford at this point in time. So he needs a highlight reel KO. So what you do is exactly what I've just said they did with Nigel Benn. You put him on a small show in the US against a guy who's got a reasonable looking record. So Peter Dobson, enter Peter Dobson, 16-0. Looks all right on paper. Not ranked by BoxRec because he's inactive. He hasn't boxed for 18 months. 33, 34. So after 16-0 at that age, if he's never done anything or fought anybody at that point, he's never going to. So if he hadn't been thrown the lifeline by Eddie Hearn, Peter Dobson would have maybe had 2 or 3 more fights and just faded away. So I don't read about the opponents. All I do is, you know, Russell, I hear about these guys. I will openly say, and I think everybody's asked the question, who is Peter Dobson? No one knows who Peter Dobson is. So I asked the question, who's Peter Dobson? Never heard of him, jumped on YouTube. So I sat and watched a few rounds of some of his fights. Now, you know, when Dennis and these other promoters and the Mick Wales and these guys, no disrespect, and Steffi, they build guys' records up.
Yeah.
They get to 13-0, 14-0, 15-0, in the hope that Eddie or Frank Warren's going to give him a ring, give him a call, put him on a big show, give him an opportunity when they haven't actually beaten anybody. And some of these guys might not be that great. This is what's happened with Peter Dobson, right? He's unbeaten, and I watched him, and had he been a British citizen, he wouldn't have won an area belt. He's really poor, and he actually looks quite old as well. And he's also, as we know, in spite of having, I think, 9 KOs on the 16 unbeaten ledger, Peter Dodson's got no power. So they know that Conor Benn is going to get a highlight reel KO. 1 rounds, 2 rounds, 3 rounds is going to blast Peter Dodson out. And this is what the marketing campaign for Conor Benn needs. Okay, still hasn't sorted the license out in the UK, whatever. But they need a highlight reel KO just like Nigel did. And they're doing it in a small hall, whether it's a ballroom or a casino or wherever it is, they're doing it in a small hall. What they've also done, which is quite clever, so even though it was relatively short notice for Conor Benn's last fight, there was still 2 or 3 weeks where they knew he was boxing on that show. They'd applied for the license and they knew what was boxing on that show. And you could hear a mouse fart in that arena, so that small arena. So they clearly didn't bring any fans over. So what Frank Smith has done in this occasion, Eddie Hearn, is the thinking, we don't just need a highlight reel KO. We need some noise and we need some screaming and we need some background. So what do? You put Johnny Fisher on the same show. Johnny Fisher is from a group of friends and a group of people who've all got a few quid, haven't they? Those guys down there. So Johnny Fisher's going to bring some fans with him just to knock over some tomato can. And Conor Benn is going to then have what looks like more support. He's going to have a spectacular KO. And then the morning after, there's going to be the Sunday sermons. I love predicting this stuff, by the way, because it's like
But we had a warm reception in America.
honestly, it's like predicting that Tuesday follows Monday. It's painful actually, isn't it? and then everyone's going to be talking about the big fights next. So once again, Conor Benn, 27 and a half, nearly 28 or whatever by the time he's boxed. He's nowhere, is he? So we talked about these
Taking
special.
Vegas by storm, isn't he? He's taking it. Some ballroom. It's not even through back door, is it? It's through cat flap.
No, they don't even know who he is, mate. They don't know who he is in the UK. He's got no in the US. He's got no relevance globally. When you see the global people, the global boxing fans talk about welterweights, no one ever mentions it. And I'll tell you what's really funny. And there's a fallout coming between Eddie Hearn and Frank Smith and Conor. There really is. Conor's not getting the love from Eddie. He might think he's getting the love, but words are one thing and actions are another. So he's wanting all the big fights, and he's on his second small, effectively it's a small hall, isn't it? He's in his second small hall on a pretty naff bill. There's no one on that bill, and he's not getting the big names. He's not getting the love. He's not really getting the backing as they go against the border control. And Eddie has more or less said, you're on your own. And Conor's not getting the love. He's not getting the attention. And there's a fallout coming. And it's so predictable. And I bet if Eddie Hearn could have wound the clock back, he would have behaved so differently last October, wouldn't he? He would have behaved so differently. And he thought, do you know what? I'm stepping away from this. Because ultimately, you talk about stars in boxing, and this is what I was coming up to. Apologies. So, Eddie, how much love is Eddie showing now for Boots Ennis? What has Eddie Hearn said about Boots Ennis? He's the future star of the welterweight division. That's Eddie Hearn's, those are Eddie Hearn's words. He's a big star. He looks like he could dominate. Eddie Hearn is going giddy over Boots Ennis, and Eddie Hearn is going global. Why isn't Eddie Hearn saying Conor Benn's going to be the big star of the welterweight division? Conor Benn's the future star, etc., etc. So Conor Benn reads this stuff, and he'll hear this stuff, and he'll watch this stuff, and whilst he won't say it publicly, he's been shoved in a small hall again, and rightly so, because he's not proved himself yet in terms of the eyes of UCAD and the British Boxing Board Control, anti-doping panel, whatever. He's not getting the love. He's fighting another made-to-measure opponent in a show, in a place where no one's going to be watching him, no one's going to care. There'll be a few clickbait titles the couple of days after when he irons this guy out. But ultimately now, Eddie's showing the love for Boots Ennis. And Conor will see all this, and it'll hurt him. And there's a fallout coming. You said about 2 years ago they'll all fall out. This is they'll all fall out. And a fallout's coming, Russell. A fallout is coming. And you know what the reality is this? He's nearly 28. And if you look at Ryan Garcia, if you look at Tank, if you look at Haney, and you look at all these guys, these were all world champions at 22, 23-year-old, weren't they? These were there at 22, 23-year-old. And you're going to have Conor Benn in the shadow of Boots Ennis globally. No belt, no real marketable win. No one really cares that much about him. And Conor Benn has had such a fall from grace, in my opinion, that ultimately, globally, on a world level, Conor Benn is nowhere at 27 and a half years old. And guess what, Conor? You ain't as good as you think you are, but the truth is this. Eddie Hearn knows you ain't as good as he first thought you were. And fallout's coming. Next 12 to 18 months, the fallout is coming. Probably after a loss, when they look for someone to blame, to quote
Eddie's face after that fight in Orlando, couldn't you?
Oh, he needed that brutal one-round KO, didn't he? So he could drum up interest. And do you know what I always think about, right? Eddie's a numbers man. Yeah. Whatever we say about Eddie, he's a joker, but he's no fool. Eddie Hearn is no fool. He's been brought up by Barry Hearn. These guys are numbers men that can smell a pound note from 100 miles away, these guys. Now, Eddie Hearn, if he really wanted to, he could have paid Chris Eubank Jr. because if it was so, remember his words a few weeks ago when the fight fell through. We knew it was never going to happen. Eddie said something about it was after Chris Eubank Jr. was after a big number. With Conor Benn is such a massive star, and you're going to book out the Tottenham Hotspur ground and you think it's going to be this massive, massive sellout, why not just invest, make a longer term investment and pay Chris Eubank Jr. what he was asking for? You know, if he was asking, initially they were going to get 3.5 million last October, split 7. If he was asking for 7 million this time, 8 million, even if it was like a crazy number, if Conor Benn is such a good long-term investment, put the money up front, make a little bit of a loss, or don't make the profit margin that you think you're going to make in the first fight. Ben destroys Eubank. You sort out the border control, whichever way you sort it out, and you've got this star on your hands. Why didn't Eddie Hearn put his hands a bit deeper in his pockets, speculate to accumulate, and really put an investment and give Chris Eubank what he was after? Why didn't he? Because what did Eddie Hearn say a few weeks ago, Russell? He said, he's asking for more money, and someone is going to have to stump that money up, and that would be us.
Yeah.
He was telling you then. We're realizing Conor Benn is not this massive star what we think he is, and we're not 100% sure we'll generate that extra 3 or 4 million that Chris Eubank's asking for. So we won't do it. So now we're chucking him in the ballroom back of one of the casinos in a little crappy little hall, sharing a bill with Johnny Fisher. That's where he's ended up, from Tottenham Hotspur in a super fight, one of the biggest fights that can be made in British boxing. And now he's fighting Peter Dobson.
Yeah.
No one's ever heard of, behind a few slot machines.
Like that one other week.
Yeah, no different. I mean, you couldn't make this shit up, could you?
No.
What's those two
Crusher's
words?
best money in it, Crusher.
Yeah, 2 words, Russell, yeah. Poetic justice.
It's summer.
Conor Benn's never going to be this star. He's never going to be a big star, folks. Got news for you. He's never going to be a genuine world champion. He might win a version of a title when the titles break up. He'll never beat an elite fighter. He won't beat an elite fighter, because if you are so confident in your fighter, right, when he's on the way up, you put him in with the British fighters. You put him in with the McKinsons. You put him in with those guys, with the Marcous. You let him blitz through domestic fighters, and then you go through the world-class fighters. But they didn't. They've completely avoided the hot guys in their own city, and they've just gone this route, which is this promotional route. Fighters we've heard of were shot to bits, and it's just not working out. He ain't that good. It's as simple as that. He's not that good.
Yeah, listen to this. I'm gonna just explain this right. Eddie's latest video. We're gonna add his latest, and I'll tell you that at the end. Obviously, we know about his 6-0 career, don't we, as an amateur? Yeah.
Devastating.
Right. We know about him cricket, Essex under-19, steaming him like Bob Willis. We know about the 5 kilometer runs that he does in marathons, like Seb Coe, you know, when he kicks dust into Steve Cram's face. That's Steve Cram, Spotty Frank. You see that video where they come around that bend, and there was Spotty Frank on bend, and Eddie kicked off, didn't he, and beat him like Seb Coe won it against Steve.
That's some victory, isn't it? Beating Frank Smith. That's a great victory, is that?
Oh, well, we saw a fight, didn't we, when he boxed Spotty Frank. There's boxing promoter, boxing manager, philanthropist, whether that's charities donations, isn't it? Football executive, darts director, father, brother, son, husband, liar, singer, comedian, author, model, podcaster, MC, window salesman, rugby league, semi-pro. Remember that one, don't you? Brentwood.
Innovator, pioneer, is
golf,
everything.
golf agent. We've had all that one, haven't we?
Yeah.
Well, the latest one is I've sent you a screenshot, didn't I? Eddie earned my life in poker on £1 million pro poker tour. The Cincinnati Kid. He's that man amazing.
He's like Paul Newman in The Hustler, isn't he? I can't watch it. He is unbelievable. But what's the common link with all
His
these
common
things?
link
No,
is he's in love with himself.
but what? But there's no footage.
Yeah.
There's only
Oh,
footage of him kicking the dust in Frank Smith's face. There's no footage of anything else, is there?
listen.
It must be some big bloody basement that Barry Hearn's got that he can't find his son's proudest moment of his unbeaten fledgling amateur career where he's icing people. You'd be pulling them out, wouldn't you? If you're an ego and you love your boxing, you'd be pulling those videos out, wouldn't you? You'd be shutting the porkies up, wouldn't you, of this world?
Listen, you know what Dennis would say? If I said, "Hey Dennis, what do you think's this bloke?" And I said all that to him, he'd say, "He sounds too bobbing."
Yeah, too Bob. What do they say? If something's too good to be true, it usually is, isn't it? But what we do know now, bless him, is he's the second best promoter in Britain, isn't he?
Well, Bricktop's promoted at year, isn't he, for the last
Yeah,
12
he's
years?
he's done him.
Out them two, out them two.
Yeah, he's done him, hasn't he? I mean, he's completely done him. And no matter what happens from here now, Frank might, at some point, there's a certain age, he might just drop down a bit, but leave it to his lads. But he's done him, hasn't he? And even if Eddie now leapfrogs over Frank over the next few years, it's only because he's been given this opportunity, isn't it? I mean, look, ultimately, right, I don't care if they just strip off naked and have a big orgy, these promoters, because as long as we get the fights we want, I'm not right bothered. They can do what they do best, which is suck up. Although, you know, this His Excellency thing's a bit cringe, isn't it? It's a bit cringe, but I don't care. If we get the fights, I'm happy with that. But yeah, it's hilarious, yeah. So he's a card shark. Um there's nothing he can't do. Most people are really good at one thing, and some people are good at two things. But it's like Daley Thompson, isn't it? He's the Daley Thompson of so many different events. It's funny. Good luck to him. Genuinely, good luck to him. The card was all right. If we get what we want, it's something to smile at and something to laugh at, isn't it? But I know we're coming to the end of the thing now, Russell. But again, I can't help but go back to my favourite thing.
What's that? Daley Thompson, Fatty McMahon with a tash.
Honestly, I mean, he even hit the punch ball machine. He was hitting it harder than Anthony Joshua and the heavyweights, wasn't he? There was even rigging the punch machine for Fast Eddie.
Already punches harder than Wilder on that machine. He's done everything, hasn't he?
Absolutely everything, you name it, devastating. Um, what a man! I mean, whoever he's probably a real stallion between the sheets as well. He's don't want to think about that, but he's probably
A horse of a man.
oh yeah. It is what it is, Russell. It's tongue in cheek, genuinely. Like we always have a laugh, don't we? But good luck to them. It's Christmas. Genuinely good luck to these guys. Let's hope we get the big fights that we want, and that's all that matters, isn't it? It's a soap opera. It's a comedy show. But I think as long as you treat it as such, and like I always said to you, I don't take it too seriously now. I did when I was in the sport, take it to heart. I don't take it too seriously now, mate. It's as cringe as it can be, but as long as we get the fights we want, I don't care about the salsa.
Okay, okay. Right. Have a great day. What's left of it. You
Thank
take
you,
care.
Russell.
Good
Cheers,
night.
buddy. See you later, buddy.
Bye. Thanks for liking and subscribing and leaving a comment. Uyaka. What do you think about today's topics we've chatted about? Let me know. Peace out.